Hello. This video is a sort of sequel to my previous YouTube video titled Making a Tuba Gig Bag for Conn 24J or similar. In that video, I described how to make a gig bag from my Conn 24J tuba, with the gig bag being sized to hold only the body of the tuba, and with the detachable bell being hand carried. Since that time, I have designed and fabricated two gig bags to carry the upright bell and the forward-facing recording bell. This video shows the steps required to make both bags, starting with the simpler 25J or upright bell. The difference between a Conn 24J and a 25J is the bell. The 25J is the upright bell. The same steps can be used to make gig bags to carry any detachable bell for any brass instrument, as long as the bell size is large enough to allow reasonably wide curves and a zipper mount the way it is in this case design. A PDF file containing a page of detailed sketches has been placed at the following web page, so you can download it and print it out. It will help to illustrate many details that are too hard to see in the photos on this video. Go to www.serpentwebsite.com/fileshare.htm and use the link for bellbagdetails.pdf. The concept involves sewing a conical-shaped bag to closely fit the outer contours of the bell. The materials used, except the zipper, were all obtained at the local Joann's Fabric and Craft store, the cost being less than $30. The primary material was ripstop nylon, but any suitable polyester would work. Check for strength by pulling a bit and trying to stretch and/or tear it. Other critical materials include 1-inch wide nylon webbing belt, such as used for making straps. This kind of web belt is also commonly sold in hardware stores. About 12 inches of 2-inch wide web belt is also a good thing to have, but if it is not available, there is an alternative for it as described later on in this video. Finally, this bag depends on having a quality luggage-style zipper available. The length of the zipper must be coordinated with the overall layout of the bag, specifically the bell diameter. Most fabric stores will not carry heavy luggage-style zippers in long enough lengths to be of use for the bell bag. A company in San Francisco, JN Zipper, sells the appropriate kind of zipper and will even sell single pieces of any length with very fast delivery and at an affordable price. Go to www.jnzipper.com. The prototype bell bag used a number 10 nylon chain zipper in black with two non-lock sliders placed head-to-head with no bottom or top stopper. This project used a 70-inch, that's 70-inch zipper length for a 24-inch diameter bell rim. Start by finding a point on the bell where the slightly conical portion coming from the bell mounting ring begins to flare and mark it. The photo shows a piece of Scotch tape with a pen mark, but you could also use a Sharpie marker or similar marking device. A grease pencil also works well for this. Measure the diameter of the bell at the point marked in the previous step. Then, with the bell resting flat on its rim, measure vertically from the rim to the height of the mark. Do not measure diagonally from the rim to the mark itself. Be careful with these marks. The pattern for the prototype bell needed to be revised twice due to inaccurate measurements made in this step. Record this dimension as about 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch larger than the actual bell so that the bag does not fit too tightly. Again, visit www.serpentwebsite.com/fileshare.htm and use the link for Conn Calculator, which lets you download an Excel spreadsheet. This spreadsheet is set up with geometry and trigonometry calculations to automatically find the critical dimensions of a truncated cone pattern. All you do is enter the measurements taken from the bell, and the spreadsheet shows a set of diagrams and dimensions of the pattern needed to make the fabric pieces of the gig bag. The bell measurements include the diameter at the mark, the diameter of the bell rim, and the vertical distance between the bell rim and the height of the mark. Lay out the truncated cone pattern on a large piece of craft paper, construction paper, or any moderately stiff paper. You will need a protractor to mark the exact angle, a long ruler or tape measure to make the long measurements, and a non-stretch string or length of wire to act as a compass for marking the large diameter arcs on the paper. Cut out the paper pattern and tape the two ends together to form a truncated cone. Elsewhere in the detail, sketch, and in this video, this pattern is referred to as the main flare. Test fit the cone to the bell. The large end should fit neatly on the edge of the bell rim, and the small end should align with the mark and have a small clearance around the bell at this point. Repeat this process for the less tapered, truncated cone used for the smaller end of the bell. Elsewhere in the detail, sketch, and in this video, this pattern is referred to as the ring flare. Since this part of the bell is much less tapered than the main flare, the pattern will have a very different shape as shown. You will need to anchor the compass string at a point a few feet away from the edge of the paper in order to mark the required large diameter arcs. Likewise, you will need to extend the angles of the protractor from the remote center point used for anchoring the compass string. These extensions can be done by having two people hold the ends taut and marking along the string. Test fit the ring flare on the bell, placing it over the main flare piece. The diameters must match where they meet, and with the two patterns temporarily taped together, the top of the rim flare should be even with the top of the bell or slightly above it. If the pattern falls lower than the top of the bell, recheck the measurements and revise the patterns, then repeat the test fit. The gig bag will not fit correctly if the paper patterns do not fit well now. Separate the taped together ring and main flare pieces and open them back up to their original flat shapes. Fold them in half, then in half again, and unfold, leaving visible creases at points corresponding to their four quadrants. Lay the bell rim side down on the fabric and trace its outline, being careful to lean the chalk marker outwards by about 1/8 of an inch from the rim, leaving the circle 1/4 inch diameter larger than the bell rim itself. Lay the unfolded patterns on the ripstop nylon fabric and trace their outlines using a chalk marker. Make tick marks at the ends of the quadrant creases. Using a compass, draw a circle for the cap piece, which will go on the small or mounting ring end of the bell, again making it about 1/4 inch larger in diameter than the actual bell measurement. In most cases, the pattern outlines for the four curved pieces marked on the fabric correspond to the seams that will be sewn when assembling the fabric pieces. To add margins, measure 1/2 of an inch outside the seam marks and make parallel cut lines. The only curved piece where you will not do this is the outer arc of the main flare. Using the previous bell rim measurement, multiply that diameter by the value pi, which for our purposes is 3.14, to obtain the circumference of the bell rim. Use the chalk marker to draw 3 straight parallel lines on the long edge of the fabric, separated by 1/2 inch and of a length equal to the circumference plus about 10 inches to allow for runout at each end. The resulting long rectangle will be for the flange piece that the zipper will be sewn to in a later step. On the prototype bell bags, it was decided to have a double layer of fabric for each piece. To keep the layers on each piece from shifting and puckering in use, they need to have some cross seams. For the bell circle piece, use the protractor to mark chalk lines every 45 degrees. For the cap piece, mark lines every 90 degrees. For the rim flare and main flare pieces, mark lines between the tick marks made earlier where the creases were in the patterns. Use pins to hold the two fabric layers together on each piece. Don't forget to pin the layers on the rectangular flange piece as well. Cut out the curved pieces along their outer cut lines, not the seam lines. In the case of the main flare piece's outer arc, there is only one line there, so cut in that position. In the case of the rectangular flange piece, only cut the outline, not the two inner lines, which will be used as fold lines and for alignment with the bell circle piece in a later step. Sew a seam inside all of the outer edges of all fabric pieces. These will keep the two layers of fabric together. Sew seams along the chalk lines that cross the curved pieces. These will keep the two layers of fabric from shifting and puckering. Use a fairly small stitch length setting on the sewing machine for all seams that are simply joining layers of fabric together. The prototype used a stitch length of about 1/16 of an inch. Wrap the ring flare piece into a tube and align the ends. Sew a seam along the chalk lines that are located 1/2 of an inch in from the ends of the fabric. Turn the tube inside out so that the seam is on the inside. This and all remaining seams should use a longer stitch length of perhaps 1/8 of an inch. Test fit the resulting ring flare piece on the bell as shown, making sure to slide the larger diameter end on first. Turn the ring flare tube inside out again, and aligning the outer edges of the circular cap piece with the edge of the smaller end of the ring flare tube, sew a seam all the way around on the chalk seam line. This needs to be done an inch or so at a time, carefully realigning the fabric in the sewing machine and simultaneously making sure that the fabric edges remain aligned. Turn the resulting capped tube right side out again and test fit to the bell. It should slide on easily, yet still have very little wiggle room. Similarly form the main flare piece into a tube, sew the side seam, and keeping the tube inside out, in other words with the fabric margins at the seam on the outside of the tube, align the edges at the small end with the fabric edges of the large end of the previously completed capped rim flare tube, and sew all the way around to join the pieces. Turn the entire assembly right side out and test fit on the bell. With the cap end all the way against the small end of the bell, the large diameter edge of the bottom of the main flare should just touch the bell rim, or at least be within 1/8 inch or so. Fold the rectangular flange piece over along one of the two inner chalk lines and iron flat. The folded edge will align with the zipper, while the unfolded edge and the chalk mark 1/2 inch from it will be used later when sewing the flange to the bell circle piece. Center the zipper lengthwise on the flange piece. Lay the folded edge of the flange on the fabric margin on one side of the zipper, with the folded part of the fabric against the zipper margin. If your sewing machine has a special zipper foot, attach it at this time. The objective now is to sew the folded edge of the fabric to the fabric margin of the zipper, placing the stitch very close to the folded edge and making it very straight. The zipper foot will help this, and you may also need to adjust the machine so that the needle is offset closer to the side close to the zipper. Once the flange piece is sewn to the zipper, test to make sure that the sliders move freely without binding on the fabric. If all is well, readjust the needle and/or zipper foot position to sew another stitch parallel to the first stitch on the side of the zipper. It is best if you can place the second stitch at a location where it will go through both folded layers of flange, but depending on the width of the zipper, this might not be possible in all cases. Regardless, 2 rows of stitches are required for strength. The finished zipper should look like this photo, and you should be able to easily move the sliders along the entire length of the zipper. Hand stitch over the zipper at each end to prevent the sliders from moving all the way to the ends, and to keep the ends from separating. About 10 loops of thread should be adequate. Make sure to tie off the ends so they don't unravel. It is now necessary to add to the runout at each end of the zipper flange to make a consistent width. Cut the length of the 2-inch wide web belt to match the length of one runout, plus a little bit more is required to cover the end of the zipper where your hand stitching was done in the previous step. If you don't have any 2-inch wide web belt, use some scrap ripstop nylon fabric 2 layers thick in place of the web belt. Refer to the detail sketch and sew the web belt or equivalent fabric piece to the end of the zipper and the runout. The web belt should be the same width as the flange plus zipper. If your zipper has a width such that the web belt does not end up being the same width, then it is better to use the fabric alternative since you can cut it to any dimension required. This photo shows the back side of the web belt at the runout. Lay the flange with the zipper on the bed of the sewing machine so that the flange is facing up and to the right, with the zipper on the left side. Lay the edge of the bell circle piece over the flange and zipper so its right edge aligns with the right edge of the flange under the sewing machine needle. Starting at the lengthwise center of the zipper, sew a seam along the chalk mark that is ½ inch in from the edge of the bell circle piece, attaching the flange and the zipper to the bell circle. As with the other curved seams done in earlier steps, this requires slow going and frequent adjustments to keep everything together and in alignment. Note that you will not want to sew this seam all the way around to the edge of the flange. Stop at the end of the zipper or perhaps an inch beyond it, and do not sew the entire runout to the bell circle. Go back to the center of the zipper and sew a seam in the other direction to the other end of the flange, also stopping near the end of the zipper and leaving the flange runout unsewn at the end. The assembly should now look like this photo. Note the runout area at the bottom of the photo where the flange is not sewn to the bell circle piece for a length of a few inches. Refer to the detailed sketch for the illustration of this same view. Currently, the zipper flange is vertical, at right angles to the bell circle piece, but when the top edge of the zipper gets sewn to the bottom edge of the main flare, that will require that the zipper flange lean inwards at a significant angle. After that is done, it will be apparent that the top edge of the zipper flange makes a smaller diameter circle than the bottom edge of the zipper flange. If the flange had been sewn to the very ends of the runout, adjustments to allow the flange to have the required inwards leaning angle would be impossible. Test fit the bell to the zipper flange and bell circle piece assembly. It should fit easily inside, yet with only slight amount of wiggle room. It will get slightly tighter after being sewn to the top part of the bag. Here is another view of the bell inside the bottom assembly, with the zipper sliders visible. With a good fit verified, remove the bell from the bottom assembly and sew a second seam parallel to the first seam, but towards the edge of the fabric flange, not towards the zipper. Mark a chalk line ½ inch inside the outer edge of the main flare as shown. Fold the edge under on this line and iron flat. Due to the curve and the angle, it will be necessary to iron only a few inches at a time before repositioning the fabric. This photo shows the upper assembly inside out, so that the folded edge of the main flare is facing up. Now for the tricky part. To sew the top assembly to the bottom assembly along the zipper, it is necessary to get the sewing machine inside the bag. The only way to do this is to open the zipper all the way, moving the two sliders to the extreme ends at the flange runouts. Note the orientation of the zipper and flange in this photo. The side of the zipper that is on the left will remain in that orientation for the final sewing step. Again, using the sewing machine's zipper foot and an offset needle, sew the folded edge of the main flare to the left side margin of the zipper. Start at the center of the zipper and sew outwards towards the runout at the end. Stop when you reach a point where the sewing machine's needle assembly runs into the end of the zipper and its slider and can proceed no further. Repeat from the center in the other direction to the other end of the zipper. As done on the other edge of the zipper where it joins the flange, sew a second seam to hold the zipper margin to the main flare. As before, start in the center and sew outwards towards the ends of the zipper. You will be left with some sewing to do at the hinge part of the bag, where the flange runout ends remain unattached to each other and to the main flare. In this photo, the two runouts are temporarily joined end to end to show the extreme buckling that results from their top edge forming a larger arc than that of the slanting main flare. Pull the runouts together and experiment with how tight they are pulled together and at what angle to best align with the unsewn area of the main flare. Trim the runouts to have about 1 inch of overlap, and also trim away any excess where the runouts cross each other at an angle. Pin together to prevent shifting. If you can get the sewing machine needle into this overlap area, sew to attach the ends. Otherwise, hand sew this area. This photo shows the hinge area with runouts realigned, trimmed and sewn, and placed under the edge of the main flare. The few inches of the hinge part of the main flare may be optionally attached to the overlapped hinge area of the runouts, or the two may be left separate. The sewing machine will not be able to reach this area, but it may be hand sewn. Alternately, you can use a short section of Velcro with heat-set adhesive and iron it to the underside of the main flare and to the top side of the overlapped runouts in the hinge area, setting the adhesive using steam from your iron. Use a length of 1-inch wide web belt for a carrying handle and sew its ends to the edge of the bell circle piece just adjacent to the flange and centered 180 degrees around from the hinge area of the bag. Make sure to cross-stitch this area thoroughly for strength. The bag is now complete and looks like this photo. The collapsed top assembly is to the left, and the hinge in the center, and the bottom assembly to the right. To put the bell into the bag, first insert the top part of the bag over the small end of the bell as shown in this photo. Then flip the bottom part of the bag over the bell rim and make sure that the entire rim is seated inside of the flange, and pull the zipper sliders around to the side of the bell opposite the hinge. Note that while the main flare piece originally reached the rim of the bell, now that it has been folded over to sew to the zipper, it is the zipper's own width that makes up the lost distance. The fit should be fairly close, without significant wiggle room, yet without straining to close the zipper or stretching the fabric. Here is another view of the bell inside the bag, with the carrying handle to the right, and here is the bag turned large end up. The crossing seams on the bell circle piece are visible here. The bell bag hangs like this when held by the carrying handle. As an alternate, you can experiment with relocating another handle to get a better hang of the bell when being carried. This completes the gig bag for the 25J bell. This video will now show additional steps required for fabricating the more complex bag shape for the 24J recording bell. The bag for the curved recording bell that goes with the 24J tuba is made very similarly to the bag for the straight bell on the 25J tuba. Both have the same bell circle piece with flange and zipper, and both have similar cap, ring flare, and main flare pieces. The 24J bag also has an additional piece in the form of a gusset, which fills in over the bell curve. The ring flare will be more conical than its counterpart on the 25J bell, and the main flare will have a slightly different height and will also have a slightly larger diameter at its small end, all to accommodate the curved section of the bell. Find a point on the bell where the curved part ends above the main flare, and make a mark using tape or something that can be removed later, such as grease pencil. Measure the diameter here, and this will be the smaller dimension of the main flare. Remember to add a small offset such as a 1/4 inch for clearance. After finding the height of the mark above the bell rim, do the calculations and pattern layout on stiff paper as previously described for the 25J bell. Test fit the resulting main flare cone on the bell. For this bag, it will work better to make the smaller test patterns out of some light colored and disposable cloth such as muslin or part of an old t-shirt. You don't want a material that is too stretchy though. Find a point about halfway around the curve of the bell and make a mark using grease pencil, etc. Measure the diameter at the mark, and this will be the large end of the ring flare piece. Do the calculations and lay out the pattern as before, transfer to the muslin, add the 1/2 inch margins at each end, cut out and sew the seam to make it into a tube. Fit the tube over the small end of the bell, with its seam along the outer curve of the bell and lined up with the bell center line. See that the bottom side of the large end of the tube bunches up where it runs into the bell. Carefully determine where the ring flare pattern meets the top edge of the main flare pattern and mark a line with felt tip pen. This line should be horizontal relative to the floor that the bell is resting on. It is only necessary to mark half of the area where the two patterns meet, to one side or the other of the bell center line. Remove the ring flare pattern and fold in half as shown here. Cut out the small area of the pattern defined by the marked line as shown. Make sure to cut through both layers of muslin without allowing the layers to shift, so you end up with a symmetrical pattern. The ring flare will now look like this. Note that the cut out area is opposite, or 180 degrees out, from the seam. Place the ring flare pattern back onto the bell, with the seam lined up as before, and verify that the cutout on the bottom lines up accurately with the top edge of the main flare pattern as shown. If it does not, make the necessary alterations before proceeding. To figure out the shape of the gusset piece, lay a rectangular piece of muslin over the part of the bell curve that remains uncovered by the ring flare and the main flare pieces. Make marks on the piece where it contacts the seam of the ring flare piece, and draw a line vertically along the center line of the bell curve, downwards to the top of the main flare piece. This line defines the center line of the gusset. Use tape to hold the gusset piece to the ring flare and main flare pieces, putting the tape at either end of the marked center line. Use the felt tip pen to mark lines where the gusset piece meets the bottom edge of the ring flare and top edge of the main flare pieces. The gusset will not wrap all the way around the bell and will stop at the 2 points where the ring flare piece meets the main flare piece on the underside of the bell curve. Remove the gusset piece and cut out the marked pattern, leaving the gusset shaped as shown. The actual shape will vary depending on the contours of your bell. Make marks defining which side of the gusset contacts the ring flare and which end contacts the main flare. Tape the cutout gusset back onto the bell and verify that it still meets the ring and main flare pieces correctly, and make any necessary alterations before proceeding. Remove the stitches at the seam of the ring flare piece. Lay the ring flare and gusset patterns on the ripstop nylon fabric and use the chalk marker to draw outlines of the patterns. Add a 1/2 inch margin around the gusset piece and add a 1/2 inch margin along both long sides of the ring flare piece. The ring flare's pattern already has a 1/2 inch margin at each end. Cut out the 2 pieces of fabric. If you are using 2 layers of fabric as described for the 25J bell bag, make sure to pin the layers together before cutting them out. Clean up the seam marks and add chalk lines to define where extra seams will be added to prevent fabric shift and buckling. As done on the 25J bell, there should be seams at each quadrant of the finished pieces. This photo shows only the center line marked, but you should make lines at the halfway points between this line and the ends of the pattern. For the gusset, this photo shows only the center line, transferred to the center line marked on the muslin pattern. Do not make the 2 additional quadrant lines the way they were done for the ring flare piece. Instead, draw the 2 lines starting from where the center line intersects with the seam mark on the left side as oriented in the photo, and with the lines ending at points halfway from the right side center line to the points at the top and bottom. These lines will be radiating to the upper right and to the lower right from the center left edge of the pattern. As done for the 25J bell, mark the fabric, 2 layers if that is what you were doing for the bell circle piece, the cap piece, and the flange piece. Add the margins as previously described. Cut these pieces out. If 2 layers are used, sew all the seams along the outer edges of the pieces and sew the cross seams as well. Sew the ring flare piece into a tube, and after a test fit on the bell, sew on the cap piece. Turn the assembly right side out and test fit it again as shown. All of these steps are just like what was previously described for the 25J bell. Here is a side view of the ring flare and cap piece assembly on the bell. Note how the cutout on the bottom of the ring flare is approximately horizontal. Turn the ring flare and cap assembly inside out again and sew on the gusset. Make sure that the center lines on the 2 pieces are aligned first, and start sewing from the center line towards the ends of the gusset. This prevents shifting that would produce an asymmetrical assembly. Turn the assembly right side out again and test fit as shown. This is another view of the assembly positioned on the bell. This is henceforth referred to as the top assembly. Once the main flare has been sewn to it, that entire assembly is referred to as the top assembly. As described for the 25J bell, Sew the main flare piece into its cone shape and sew its top edge to the bottom edge of the top assembly that was just completed. Remember to turn both pieces inside out before sewing them together, and align the main flare seam with the center line mark of the gusset. Turn the entire assembly right side out and test fit as shown. Here is another view of the assembly positioned on the bell. The remainder of the steps are exactly like those for the 25J bell bag. Assemble the zipper to the flange, add the web belts to the runouts, assemble the zipper flange to the bell circle piece, sew the top of the zipper to the bottom edge of the main flare. Take the same steps to resolve the fit in the hinge area, trimming and sewing the ends of the runouts. Sew on the carrying handle. This photo shows the bell positioned inside the flange, and you can see how the top assembly slides into the small end of the bell as it hinges over. This photo shows the bell bag with one side of the zipper closed. And this photo shows both sides of the zipper closed. This photo shows the completed bell bag from the side, and this photo shows the bag viewed from the hinge side. The bell bag hangs like this when held by the carrying handle. As an alternate, you can experiment with relocating another handle to get a better hang of the bell when it's being carried. This completes the gig bag for the 24J bell. Hopefully watching this video will give you ideas for how to make a similar bag for your own detachable bell.